Now, this is very interesting, and I'm very curious to see what people's thoughts are about a change of mind on a very important topic. This is today's Arsenal News Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is indeed the Arsenal News Show. Joining every single morning at 8 a.m. UK time. Thank you so much as always for joining us and making this a part of your morning routines. It is greatly appreciated. Hope you're doing good. Hope you're doing well. Hope that your week has started off in the perfect way possible. And of course, we'll be tuning in and joining in with part 2, where we'll be tackling as many of your questions as feasibly possible. But good morning, those joining us live in the chat. Scouse Gooner, John LaRoche, we've got Gary and Rob, we've got Shari and Paul and Franklin, we've got Answer, we've got Runs with Cows and Steve and Knowledge and Paul. Good morning to you, to Errol, to Natty Tom, to Red Star, to Martin and Steve. Good morning to Claire and Cheech, Nara Silky and Amund. Good morning to you all. We got Carrie Ann, Sid, Norris, Gooner76, Amber Lee, all the usual and unusual faces that join us each day. Thank you so much, as always, so many of you and everybody else that I can't unfortunately get to reading out all of your names, but thank you. And Joe L, who's now been a member. He's been a member for 4 months. Good to be back, Tom. Still love the show. Thanks. I appreciate it. I'm glad that you still like it. Whatever it is I've done that might make you question that, I don't know. But I'm glad that you still like the show. Good morning to all of you, though. Please make sure you drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here with those notifications turned on so you never miss a show. Right, let's jump, shall we, into today's slides and tackle whatever today's stories have to hold for us. Let's indeed jump straight into Sid Lowe's interview with Cristhian Mosquera, of which he went all the way to, I think, Luga to have a conversation with the Arsenal young defender. And he asked him all about Mikel Arteta. I'm not going to read you the full interview because I think you should go and read it on the Guardian website or, of course, in the Guardian newspaper. And Mosquera says he really lives for football in terms of talking about Arteta. He was raised on it, experienced everything. You see that when he talks. He loves the detail, sees things others might not see. I'm so happy with him. He's an incredible person and he's helped me a lot. The staff had made it easy. Arsenal is an incredible club. And as I say, you can read the full interview between Sid Lowe and Cristhian Mosquera on the Guardian website. So make sure you go and check it out. But Mosquera, his role could be taking something of a greater focus with Gabriel Magalhaes out injured. Arteta has a choice to make to see whether or not it will be Mosquera or be Nkapie or will be Miles Lewis-Skelly and Calafiori playing together on that left-hand side. We have options. We have choices, and we haven't had options and choices this broad and this good for quite some time. So very much looking forward to seeing what exactly Mikel Arteta does decide to do when it comes to Arsenal's defence in the wake of this Gabriel injury, an injury that we don't, unfortunately, have much of any update yet so far. Just the confirmation, of course, that it is a muscular problem that he has suffered and that there is a significant doubt over his attendance for the North London derby. We'll be hearing from Mikel Arteta, of course, on Friday in that press conference ahead of the game on Sunday. So we still have some days to wait before we find out about that. Bad news, Arsenal fans that are very much conspiracy theorists about officials and referees, because Michael Oliver is the referee who has been selected to take charge of the North London derby on Sunday. Now, this will be the first time that Michael Oliver has taken charge of an Arsenal game since that red card was awarded and then subsequently rescinded to Miles Lewis-Skelly in the game against Wolves at Molineux. So quite the time, quite the game to reintroduce Michael Oliver to an Arsenal fixture. It's been some time. Why the time it has taken for Michael Oliver to officiate Arsenal, we don't actually know. We don't know if any complaints were made. We don't know if he was taken off of Arsenal games strategically or specifically. We actually don't know why Michael Oliver has not taken charge of an Arsenal game since that particular fixture, if there was an actual decision behind that. But let's hypothetically say that there was some methodology behind Michael Oliver having not refereed an Arsenal game since his decision to send off Miles Lewis-Skelly was overturned. Why would they bring him back for the most frenetic, chaotic, and arguably tenacious and red card likely game of any fixture on Arsenal's calendar? I don't know, is the answer. I don't know why it would be this game. Why it couldn't be Arsenal against Wolves again in a different game at home at the Emirates. Why it couldn't be the Everton Arsenal game. Why it couldn't be the Villa. Why it couldn't be in any of the other kind of lower profile games for Arsenal this season. I don't know. I don't know why it is the North London derby that it is the game that Michael Oliver is being reintroduced to Arsenal for the first time. But I just can't see a world in which he doesn't have any bearing on this game in some way, shape, or form. The North London derby needs a referee that is absolutely perfect. And from the last experience that we've had of Michael Oliver, we know that that hasn't been the case. And he's made a significant error that, in fact, got overturned when appealed. So, yeah, it's very, very difficult to understand this decision. Frankly, whoever the referee was, maybe other than trying to think of some of the new referees, I think Sam Barrett's been one of the newer referees. I haven't really had a problem with his performances so far, but all the usual ones, we have a reason to have a bit of caution and concern about who the referee is for the game. So I guess whoever it was, there'd be something to say, but yeah, let's just keep fingers crossed that it's a game that doesn't involve the referee playing much of a role whatsoever. But that, amazingly, isn't the biggest story of the day, because in the Times yesterday, a report from Martin Ziegler has, as an exclusive report, has revealed that the salary cap plan of many, many clubs that had looked like it was kind of heading towards a reality is now under threat, because Arsenal are one of the clubs that are said to be reviewing their position on the matter. It reads, Arsenal are among a number of Premier League clubs reviewing their position on a controversial new salary cap, with the proposal under serious threat before Friday's scheduled vote on the issue. The Premier League leaders were one of the main drivers for the introduction of an anchoring, which is in inverted quotation marks. That's kind of the definitive terms to describe what this is, which would limit spending to 5 times the amount paid in prize money. So the idea was that the prize money that a team earns, you would have a salary for your squad that did not exceed 5 times the amount of that particular earnings, basically. Now, what's interesting about this is apparently that Arsenal's former executive vice chairman Tim Lewis, who obviously previously left the club, was reportedly a kind of a big backer of this idea and was kind of the key figure that was kind of really influential in Arsenal's stance regarding being in support of a salary cap. However, there are suggestions that around 8 clubs are now hesitant about the proposal, which includes obviously Arsenal, Manchester United, Manchester City also not too keen. And despite the fact that Arsenal voted in favour last time, the current climate suggests the outcome could be different. So it also includes what's called a squad cost ratio, which are a set also to be voted on Friday alongside the anchoring. And some clubs previously concerned about anchoring now fear its potential adoption in the Championship could restrict financial flexibility for teams fighting for promotion. So, yeah, it's interesting, this kind of element of it. And obviously, players' side of things, a salary cap could impact their earnings. It's interesting that Arsenal's stance has changed. And obviously, with Tim Lewis leaving now, it seems that Arsenal have changed their stance on the idea of a salary cap. I don't really know how I feel about this one. It's when you're not in it and you're not kind of like, there knowing all the finer details of what the finances are and what the reasons will be. It's difficult to kind of have a strong opinion on such a thing. Arsenal currently sit top of the league. Arsenal have one of the highest salary bills in the country. I think we have the second or third highest in the league, which makes sense because obviously we're now at the top of the kind of top end of the table, whereas before maybe that wasn't the case, and so Arsenal's salaries in general, kind of the total amount wasn't as high. The idea of capping salaries obviously would restrict, I think, at both ends of the league, because you could argue that it restricts the biggest clubs from just paying players huge amounts of money, but it could also have an impact on teams that get relegated to the Championship if those salary caps are quite considerably less. It also might make Championship clubs less competitive when they come up to the Premier League, and it might make it easier for Premier League clubs to kind of snatch away the best talent in the second tier too. So I don't really know broadly were to have kind of a strong stance on this, but it's going to be interesting to see how this kind of one develops as well. There's also, and I think Soup raises this point very fairly, is that a salary cap would need to be introduced worldwide. Otherwise, players would just go to other countries as well. You got kind of nations like the Saudi League, which are paying huge amounts of money, of course, as well. And if players can't earn as much, maybe other leagues like La Liga will also then kind of start thinking about how they can boost their profile by paying players even more. Bayern Munich already pay a huge amount of money to their players too. So, it's going to be intriguing how this goes. Just so you're aware, for those that don't know, when a vote takes place between 20 Premier League representatives, to pass a vote, you need 14 of those 20 clubs voting in favour. If 7 clubs vote against it, it will not pass, even if 13 vote in favour. So you need a majority of 14 out of 20 for any motion to be passed. And if there is now 8 clubs that are considering their position on this and being potentially against this, it doesn't look like that vote will pass on Friday. So, interesting story. And certainly one that I think brings in plenty of attention to Arsenal, especially about how the change at the hierarchy level and the executive level has changed Arsenal's stance on a number of different topics. And if just the exit of Tim Lewis and the introduction of a number of different club hierarchy members has changed their stance from one side to the other, where they would vote in a completely different way to what they previously voted in, that's quite interesting to know that the Arsenal hierarchy stance has changed a complete 180 in regards to kind of this particular topic. And then you have to think, well, what else have they changed their minds on? And is it for the better? Because we don't really know. Because we don't really have as much information as we might need and might want. So that is, again, very, very intriguing to see how this one is going to play out. But you don't need to leave necessarily everything to chance. You don't need to leave yourself out of the know on everything, because you could put yourself very much strongly in the know when it comes to whether your knowledge of whether you're safe and secure when surfing the net is up to scratch. And you can be up to scratch when it comes to adding that extra layer of security and safety by going to NordVPN, which will give you that safety and security that you've always been yearning for, searching for, grappling for, and desiring, by going to nordvpn.com/Gooner and getting yourself a significant discount off a 1 or a 2-year plan. And if you're happy with the service, you will stick with it. But if you're not, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee on top of that as well, that anyone who could say any fairer than that, let's be honest. 30-day money-back guarantee. You can try it. Maybe you go on a holiday soon, hop away on holiday. Maybe you're going somewhere warmer than the cold that it is over here right now. Then obviously you're going to need to grab yourself a NordVPN subscription. And you can do that by going to nordvpn.com/Gooner. Terms and conditions, as always, all the territories are supported by the NordVPN website. You can go and check out the list that are supported there, and you can use it on your mobile, your tablet, or your laptop. Right, let's go to part 2, your questions and more, right after this. Right. Before we go into the chat box and tackle some of your questions, some of your thoughts and feelings, what I am going to do is I'm going to tell you about a brand new podcast that is starting as well. A brand new podcast that is hosted by myself and our chief football writer at The Mirror, Mr. John Cross, of course, who is a colleague of mine I've been working with since I've done more work closely with The Mirror, and in general, of course, as well at the games. And if you have not yet watched episode 1 or our promo episode, you can, of course, do that. If you go over to Seeing Red, Google Seeing Red Arsenal, it'll come up. Seeing Red, the unofficial Arsenal podcast. It'll come up on your YouTube channel, on your YouTube feed. You may already even be subscribed to it, because the channel that we're doing this podcast on used to be what was the Arsenal Way. You'll remember the Arsenal Way YouTube channel, which is the YouTube channel that we started back in 2021, 2022, myself, Umar, Chris, Bailey, Charlie, Alfie, a number of us obviously started that channel and built that channel up to what it is today. And then obviously when the company went through some restructural changes and we sadly lost some people and other people made decisions to move on, I'm just kind of the last one left really of the whole group that started the Arsenal way. And it sucks because I loved, doing the shows with those guys, and I'm still in contact with them, and they're a great group of people. But with this brand new show, we are launching it on the Arsenal way, which we are rebranding to the Seeing Red unofficial Arsenal podcast, which is going to be a weekly podcast on the channel. Mondays, Tuesdays, depending upon scheduling, depending upon mine and John's availability, there will be a weekly podcast discussing all things Arsenal. And in our first episode this week, we obviously talked a lot about the Gabriel injury. We talked about Saka and Eza scoring for England, where, of course, John went to Albania to watch England beat Albania 2-0 and was at the Serbia game where they beat Serbia 2-0, and those two players scored those two goals. We talked about the North London derby. And we have, for our maybe listeners that like nostalgia, we have a segment called The Flashback, where we look back at our favourite kind of moments from a particular game that relates to the weekend fixture. So with this being the North London derby weekend, we look back to two of our favourite moments in the North London derbies of the past before they're looking ahead to the brand new North London derby this weekend. So, it's if you are indeed new to the channel, welcome. If you're a subscriber to the Arsenal Way, you will already be subscribed, and so it will be it'll be there. So if you just type in on YouTube, Seeing Red Arsenal, the show will come up without a problem. But I'll try and leave a link to it after the show's finished in the post-match description. Of course, you can also find it on my social media feeds. And I've also shared the episode on the community or posts tab of this channel's posts page. So if you go onto the Gooner Talk homepage and click on the posts tab, you will see me having shared the podcast as well. So go and check it out. I really enjoyed the first episode. It was a really good conversation, and I look forward to doing more over the course of the season and into the future. It's going to be good. I can't wait to keep on going with it. Canu says, what happened to our podcast we did with Mo? It was the Arsenal Lounge. I was a guest on the Arsenal Lounge. It wasn't my podcast. It was Lev and Shaheen. And we just haven't done it. People have had lives. People have had children. People have got new jobs. And it's made it very, very difficult to do those shows. That's why it stopped. It stopped happening. That's all there is to it. There's no drama, I'm afraid. I can't tell you any. I was chatting to Mo the other day, actually, and we had a really good conversation just about life and just how things are at the moment as well. So it was great to kind of catch up with Mo. Maybe we'll get Mo on the channel again one day, and Shaheen and Lev. It'd be great to catch up with them. And if they're watching, know that I'm thinking about you. Right, let's go to Robert, who says, I watched the highlights from the 88-89 league-winning game against Liverpool. A fantastic watch, showing a very young Paul Merson, the late David Rocastle. I made him see the state of the pitch, of course, in those days as well. Yeah, if you've not watched the 89 documentary as well, you absolutely, it's like a rite of passage, I think, these days. Amy Lawrence did a brilliant job in her work in helping produce that documentary. So go and give it a watch because it is a brilliant, brilliant piece of media. Yaya says salary cap will just save more money for the owners and limit what lesser players can get when the marquee players take the majority of the budget. I'm always on the players' side, so no to a salary cap, says Yaya. Robert says, and back to that 88-89 game, there were only 2 substitutes that could be made at that time. Amazing, isn't it, how the game has changed rules-wise since then as well. Philip says, with dreams of playing for Arsenal and Bournemouth saying Semenyo has a £65 million clause, would you be tempted in January? Absolutely, yeah. I think if Arsenal could get Antoine Semenyo and he'd be kind of the Martinelli or Trossard replacement for the summer, that I think would be a brilliant piece of business by Arsenal. If they can do it in January and stop Liverpool, of course, from going early and getting a deal done for Semenyo, that would be, again, another great opportunity. Let's go to Sir Nicholas says, I've been a subscriber and a listener since episode 1, 8 minutes after it launched, and I'm an Arsenal content junkie. Love that. Clint says, Yardman says he'd take a Europa League over the Premier League. Which one would you want? I don't think you even need to ask that question because the idea of picking the Europa League over the Premier League is just ludicrous. So, no, it's the Premier League, obviously. Some people just want to be divisive for the sake of being divisive. Keeps them on camera. You get it by now. You know how the game works. Serkin says, pretty indifferent to the salary cap unless there's a desire to reduce the amount of money in general being earned and extractive from fans, then how's it fair to just place a cap on players' earnings? So, fair question. Tom says, do we have a distinct lack of quality referees in the Premier League? Yes. The simple answer is yes. Cheech says, is the podcast available on Spotify? It should be. The podcast should be available on your audio platforms as well. I'll just do a quick check. I hope that it is. Seeing Red Arsenal. Let's have a look. Yes, it is. It is there. I can see it. Gabriel injured on Brazil duty. Saka scores. It's the first episode. So, yeah. And then you can see some of our older episodes that we used to do, of course, on the channel too. So, yeah. But go and check it out on the Seeing Red, the unofficial Arsenal podcast. It is indeed available on audio platforms as well. Alex says, Tom, if the wording is that salary cap is based on competition earnings versus club earnings, including sponsorship and commercial deals, that's what hints at why Arsenal maybe are backing out. Well, it would be obviously what they earn from competitions and then 5 times that amount, I guess, which is obviously always going to fluctuate as well, whereas your squad wages will fluctuate, but more going up gradually than up and down like your earnings might. Black Sean says, I am subscribed, but cannot remember when this happened because it definitely was not this month. No, we've been doing the Arsenal way for a long, long time. So you probably were subscribed quite a long time ago. Philip says, with dreams of playing for Arsenal and Bournemouth, saying Semenyo has 65 million clause, would you be tempted in January? I think we tackled that one. Did you write it twice, Philip? I think you did, because the answer was yes. Cheech says, I was having a good morning till Tom told us that Michael Oliver is going to be the ref for the derby. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I'm just the messenger. Can only apologise. Ollie says, any news on Odegaard's return from injury? Going to be crucial for us to have him back ASAP. I mean, it is hoped that he'll be back like soon after the international break. It might not be for Spurs. It might be for the midweek game. It might be for Chelsea. But it is hopefully going to be soon. So fingers crossed that will be the case. So Nicholas says, Tom, did Foden serve today's show on a plate to you? Yes. This show would not happen without Phil Foden's pass. I think we all know that, right? It's how every working element of life is got to be thankful to Phil Foden's pass. That's all we can say, really. Mike says, it's a rather sobering thought, but how poor must the referees further down the pyramid be if the Premier League referees are the elite level? And again, another fair question to ask. D says, why are we swerving the Michael Oliver conversation? It is such an injustice to see us fans. We should all be standing together on this. It's a clear conflict of interest, yet no one is talking about it. Why? Obviously, this relates to the fact that Michael Oliver kind of refereed. I think it was where did Michael? It was in the Middle East, of course, somewhere, and he was paid for it. And obviously, I think the people that paid for it have their links to Manchester City, allegedly. So I guess the reason why it's because, again, it's one of those where we don't have enough to suggest that, because ultimately Man City are owned by people that are in a nation, whereas is there a guarantee that it was the same people? I don't know enough about the story. So is it a case it was the same people? Even if it was the same people, it's a different league. Is that him going to another league to get paid going to result in him being biased towards City? Is there any evidence of that? Until we have that evidence, what can we say? What can we do? And then you need evidence that there is elements of what you're suggesting, which at the moment we don't have. So, or if you do have them based upon those events, you need it more so. You need more evidence than that, I'm afraid. You need more evidence than that. I actually empathise with why you're asking the question. I'm not saying you're wrong for bringing it up. I just think what we've got and what you have got is not enough. It's just not enough. And I'm sorry for that, but that's just the reality. He also made the silly decision that got Trossard sent off. Absolutely. It was a silly decision. Rons of Cal says, how can you have a contract designed to span multiple years that specifies financial terms when the figures will change annually? It just doesn't make sense. It's another very fair question. Rev says, the question is not if we get a red during the North London Derby, it's who is going to get the red during the North London Derby. Raj says, did you enjoy Sunday Supplement? And who's a journalist that you would look up to? I did. It was a program that I watched regularly before it was then brought back. And I think Dharmesh is doing an absolutely brilliant job in reviving Sunday Supplement. John, of course, John Cross was and has been a big part of Sunday Supplement for a long, long time. I'm glad that it's back because, print media is something that needs more attention, and print media is something that it almost feels like in the world of kind of online, digital, newspapers and that. The amount of times I've said I've got a piece out in the newspaper and someone's turned around to me and said, they're still doing newspapers. And I'm like, yeah. And hundreds of thousands, millions of newspapers get sold every single day. It's still, people read them. So I think it's important to shine a light still on print media. I think it's really, really important to do that, because I think people obviously get frustrated by media, get frustrated by the press for loads of different reasons. But journalism is really important. It's the reason why we find out about things that people don't want to be found out about. It's the reason why we have information on loads of different topics. The reason why we have so much access that we do these days to sport. So support it. Absolutely. Support it when you can. Cheech says, I know you listen to Arsenal's Vision podcast. What do you think about the brilliant series of Cup Winners' Cup? I haven't listened to that aspect yet. I tell you what, I do listen to the Vision when I get time, but it's nowhere as near as regular as I'd like to. So I need to catch up on the Cup Winners' Cup stuff. But let me know which episode that was, and I'll try and prioritize it. Claire says, will the government pay a Spanish referee to come over and referee our games? I mean, if you've ever watched La Liga, Claire, I'm not necessarily sure that you'd want that. It's not exactly the best example of the best refereed league in Europe either. And Tom says, do we need an investment cap on Middle Eastern nations to avoid refereeing biases and disrupting transfer markets? Again, it's something that would need to be passed through government, and there's a lot of Middle Eastern money, of course, that does come into the UK. So I don't think that would happen. I don't think that would be dissuaded. So yeah, I can't see that happening. Tom says, ahead of the North London derby, could we shed light on Arsenal's improved discipline this season compared to previous seasons as well? Yeah, Arsenal haven't received a single red card this season, have we not? I don't think. No red cards at all so far, touch wood, which is a positive thing. Arthur says, Tom is usually cautious when it comes to referees in the PGMOL. Big difference with Terry. I am cautious because I think it's important to be cautious. I think it's important that you need to have evidence, and it's important to, when you say certain things, and obviously I work in the media directly and have my associations in terms of writing for several publications. So what I say, I'm also representing, in many ways, what I say, I'm representing them to an unofficial degree. And so I have to think about, if ever I'm going to make any accusations, I've got those associations. So I have to think about that. I think you should. It's the same as like when to give you kind of a really dumbed down version of that. When you were at school and you were wearing your uniform for your school, you're representing your school. So I have to think about that, and you have to be really on it when it comes to making any kind of accusation. That's why I use the word allegedly a lot. So I'm very conscious. I've also done a law qualification, so I'm very much well aware of the law implications of things. So when there's been topics that people would like me to talk about that I can't talk about for legal reasons, I have to accept the stick that I'm going to get by not talking about it, but I have to take the advice that I've been taken. And if I don't follow that advice, then I'm going against the advice that I've been advised with. So again, I have to follow that advice. It's easy for you to say what you like on social media, but behind an account that doesn't have your real face on it, doesn't have your real name on it, this is me, talking. So it's very different for you than it is for me. Raj says, do you ever think the print media will resonate with the youth in the future? And I hope that it does. And I hope that, pieces that I write in some ways do resonate with a younger audience. I think that things will need to change for that to happen more. But yeah, I just think it's really important. I just think that it's really important to try and improve the youth and the younger generation's relationship with print media, because it's the bedrock of all journalism at the end of the day, really. It's what spawned every bit of media that you see these days, from social media to broadcast media, all came from newspapers at the end of the day. So, it's important to support it. Not just because I'm employed by a newspaper. Arthur says, you could always back yourself by saying allegedly. It's not. I wish it was that simple. And I do say allegedly a lot, but it is genuinely not that simple. Just to give you a bit of an example, like if you ever think about on Twitter or X these days, you can be liable for like defamation by retweeting something that's defamatory. Just because you didn't write it, but you retweeted it. Even if you don't think your retweets or reposts, I think as they're called now, even if your repo, you have in your bio, my reposts are not an endorsement, it doesn't necessarily matter. If you retweet something that is potentially liable, you can get done for that. And there are examples in law where people have been fined for retweeting things, because in law you can get fined for that. So just to give you an example of how strict the law is and how vulnerable you can be if you don't know your way around the law, it's a dangerous place, and people can get in trouble for things you wouldn't think that you could get in trouble for. So it's worth bearing that in mind. Mike says, Tom is trying to explain vicarious responsibility. We can say it, but he can't. I mean, technically you can't, and if I see like a liable comment in my comment section, I will get rid of a liable comment because it's my channel. So you have to think about that. You might say that's mad that I have to be responsible for that, but I have the ability to remove potentially a liable comment. Therefore, if I see one, I'll do my best to remove it. Sometimes I'll miss them, but if I see them, I'll do my best to remove them because you could potentially get in trouble for it. It's just that's how the law works. And Kingsley says, what a joke. And you might think it's a joke, but it's not when you're facing a lawsuit. So you need to think about that. Let's go to Steve says, those of a certain vintage knows that fish and chips will always need print media. Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Fish and chips back in the day. Come home on a Friday night and wrap up your chips in a bit of newspaper. So it's a shame they don't necessarily do it as much anymore. They should do. Support the newspapers. Newspapers are going to be quite expensive these days, so maybe not. Logan says, are there stats available on actual performances and referees' decisions? You can look at kind of a referee's record for a certain club on Transfermarkt. So you can go on specific referees and see how many red cards they've given to certain clubs. You can do that on Transfermarkt. So if you want to do that, you can, and you have access to that data. Philip says, if you could invite 5 players and ex-players for dinner, who would you invite and what would you cook? Well, I mean, I would cook pasta because that's my favourite food. But who would I invite? Well, players. I mean, Arsene Wenger is an ex-player, so I can definitely still invite Arsene Wenger. Cesc Fabregas, probably Mikel Arteta. Santi. I guess I'd have to cook paella, wouldn't I? Really, I have to do. I'd probably get slated by the Spaniards there, but surely I'd have to think about. And I love Spanish food as well, so wouldn't have an issue trying to. I do cook paella, and it's not too bad. No, number 5 would it be another Spaniard? Probably Thomas Rositzky, actually. Yeah, so that's for sure. Mike says, Tom, that sounds crazy. You shouldn't be held responsible for what someone says in the chat box. The chat box is obviously a bit better because the chat box disappears after the live show. It's more about the comment section because the comment section is permanent, so and it stays there. So I'm obviously more responsible for what's said in there, because if it's left up when I can remove it and it's something defamatory, then you could argue that I'm responsible. You can make the argument. I can make the argument as well that I'm not responsible for it if I've missed it or not seen it or for whatever reason, because you can't be across everything. I am only one man. And it's more for I think, high profile companies that have obviously a much larger influence, those types of things, because you could argue that if that person sees something liable underneath somebody's post and they have the opportunity to remove that. It's why I think as well, like social media, and I don't, because there's that law as well that exists. So why don't social medias become liable for things that are liable and said on the platform? I don't. Maybe they are. Maybe the social media platforms go through huge amounts of legalities because of that. I don't know, but I do know that there is an element of responsibility that you have. Jerome says you're not responsible for what others say and do. Unfortunately, in some cases, you can be held responsible for what other people have said if you have not taken the measures that need to be taken to remove anything that is potentially liable. So, unfortunately, Jerome, speaking as someone who's got a law qualification, you can be responsible for what others have said and done, if indeed that you have not put in place measures to be able to prevent that from being shown, And sometimes you can make mistakes. Sometimes I will click on a comment that comes up on screen and I'll apologize for it because I didn't read it before I put it up and I don't endorse it. I don't support it. And I have to make that very clear. So, and that has happened in the past. So yeah, you have to be very cautious. And obviously it's unfair for people, obviously, that don't have law qualifications. It's unfair for people that don't have that information, but there is an element that would be argued that you need to kind of be aware of it. So yeah. And D, I understand your comments about Michael Oliver, and you say that you're surprised I haven't looked into it more, but you have to understand that there is only so much that you can read into it. And I also think that there is still not enough evidence for you to make the allegations that have been made at this point in time. I don't think there is enough evidence at this point. You can talk about a conflict of interest argument. You can make the argument, but I still personally don't think there's enough evidence, in my opinion, of someone who is not a legal expert, but has a legal qualification. I don't think there's personally enough evidence at this point in time to make serious allegations as such. And I get it needs highlighting and exploring. We've talked about it. We've talked about it today. So that's brought attention to it. Claire says, so basically don't spout nonsense unless it's factual, not just because some weirdo on YouTube or X with a weird username has said it. It's also a fact. Exactly. And you have to be so careful with social media these days because disinformation, misinformation is spread so easily. It's why I was very keen on the whole warmed up separately, trained separately distinction when we were talking about Gabriel the other day, because that was really important. You know, the amount of people that had huge followings online saying that he trained separately, we never heard that. We never found that out. We never were told that. We were told that he warmed up separately. So we don't know ultimately if he did train separately. We only know that he warmed up separately. So it's really important to make that distinction. So yeah, again, worth doing that. Daniel says, who's the best in the squad when it comes to external media? Oh, it's Martin. Well, it depends, actually. It depends on the context. So Martin is the best in a context in the sense that he always will give you, he'll give you his time most of the time, which is really important. He's the captain, so he has that responsibility, absolutely. But he'll give you answers. But it depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for kind of a story, Martin's very good at probably not giving you that story. Sometimes he will, but you know, sometimes you want to talk to players that have a lot less media experience because they're going to give you kind of a cool scoop, or they're going to give you something that maybe the club would rather they didn't say. And there's definitely been situations in the past, and I've looked back at an interview and gone, that's quite funny. Not interviews I've done, but just others that I've read and thought, oh, that's quite funny that they've said that in an interview and then it's gone out. So yeah, I think that there is examples of players. So like Martin's good for giving you time, because if Arsenal haven't won a game, you know, I don't do the mix zone anymore because I do it sometimes, but I don't do it as often as I used to because I'm now in the press conferences. But when I was standing in the mix zone after Arsenal hadn't won a game, and even if they'd just drawn a game, it's very rare that you will grab a player for an interview. They're not contractually obliged to do a mix zone interview, and they have to kind of be encouraged to do it. And it can be a bit of a challenge sometimes to get a player in the mix zone because it's, as I say, it's not a contractual obligation necessarily. But they are obliged to walk through the mix zone, even though not always they do. Sometimes they sneak out of a back entrance and don't walk through the mix zone. But when it comes to kind of those interviews, Martin gives you really good answers. Jurriën Timber can give you really good answers. Saliba can give sometimes some really good answers, even though he's got the challenge of the not being his first language. Declan Rice can be good for interviews, but doesn't tend to do them in the mix zone too often. Saka can be quite good. You know, B can give you some really good answers. In fact, if you listen to the pod with me and John yesterday on Seeing Red, you'll hear John talking about Saka in interviews as well. So, yeah. And Marino is, yeah, you're right, Mike. It's a really good shout. Marino can be really good. I always tell the story of like the first interview I ever did with Miko Marino is that he came over and was like, first of all, I'd like to apologize for my English, and then used the word stimulus in an answer to a question. And I was sitting there like, sorry, your English is better than mine. Don't know why you're apologizing for it. So yeah, there are some really good ones, and there are some players that you can tell don't necessarily like doing media. Leo was one of those, but I actually think the press conference that Leo did in Prague was really good. I thought he had a really good press conference in Prague, gave some really good answers. So maybe he's coming around a little bit. I certainly gave some feedback that I thought it was his best press conference that he'd done, and he was definitely improved on that front. So yeah. I'm trying to think what some of my favorite interviews have been. When I interviewed Victor, I quite enjoyed the chat with Victor. Think of anybody else. I mean, Granit Xhaka. Obviously, I've got my stories of Granit Xhaka, but he would always be very honest, very blunt, he'd be a good person to have at the dinner table, probably in that kind of more relaxed setting. So maybe Granit Xhaka over Rosicky potentially. Ben White. I mean, I've interviewed Ben White once. I didn't get a classic Ben White interview from him, as you've seen in some of the other ones. He was actually very good with his answers. I wouldn't necessarily was too keen on doing the interview, but he locked in and switched it on for the interview, and he gave some. He didn't give the classic Ben White answers, but he gave kind of some better answers in that moment. But yeah, it's I was part of me kind of wanted to get the Ben White treatment just to say that I have had the Ben White treatment, but he actually gave some really good stuff to us. To be fair to him, I think it was after one of the Liverpool games a couple of seasons ago. Tom says, is Arteta improving at managing his emotions in post-match interviews? I was surprised he didn't blame the ref for the Sunderland game with the Zuba yellow. And then I don't think he actually got asked about those, to be fair, though. He didn't get asked about those situations. I did ask him about the Prague penalty situation at the end, and he did say he was very angry, to be fair. So, because he didn't think it was a penalty. He talks about his touchline behaviour. So I guess it depends on what and when he's asked as well. That's probably also fair to point out. Curtis says it's because Mikel called him miserable. He's coming around now. I think he did maybe take that a little personally, and maybe I don't think Leo really took it in the right way. Maybe it was kind of like lost in not in translation, but lost in context, because it was kind of said lightheartedly, and actually I think it was said in kind of like a negative to a positive. So he's moany, but he does it in a good way, and it makes him a better player. But I don't think he took it in the right way. Daniel says, do you think Mikel is one of the best in the league at press conferences now? I think he speaks. Probably. I mean, I'm not in enough press conferences to know if that's the case. I have sat in another press conferences. I have sat in another managers. I've been in many Eddie Howe press conferences now. I've asked Eddie Howe about Isak in the past, about whether he would leave Newcastle, and he gave a good answer. I've sat into a Sean Dyche press conference. I've now sat into a Carlo Ancelotti press conference. So, and I think Mikel is good in presses. I think that Mikel can be quite cold, at times, and you can almost tell immediately within the first few minutes what type of press conference you're going to have from Mikel. I think that's probably fair to say. Even I know when he walks into the room. So the Arsenal press room is kind of split into two halves. You've got the half that you see where all the chairs are kind of lined up and you sit there, but there's another room behind that where we have tables and we work on our laptops and write the stories up after or before the press conferences. And Mikel will walk through that room, and then we'll all go and sit down in the other room, unless we're already sitting in that room waiting. But sometimes you can tell just by Mikel walking into the room what type of press conference it's going to be. And sometimes he'll make like a light-hearted comment, and sometimes he'll make a joke, sometimes he won't say anything, and so you kind of know straight away what type of presser you're going to get. But I'd say most of the time that he's usually in a pretty good mood. But maybe like a story's been going around, maybe he knows something that's going to, he knows that the topic's been doing kind of the rounds, and so he's probably going to get asked on it, and so he's maybe in the zone prepared for that. There's loads of different reasons. I like to think that I usually get him to be a little bit more lighthearted at times with some of the questions that I ask, but sometimes you need to ask serious questions. Sometimes it's not always just about asking kind of an intriguing, lighthearted question. Sometimes you've got to ask a tough question. When I asked about, the starting Marino at Anfield, it didn't go down great, and so he was asked about starting Marino against Man City by Jordan. And that, that back and forth was also a little bit tense, but it's also a high emotional, high kind of locked in moment as well. So it can be a challenge. You'll get different kind of responses, I think. Yeah, Claire's right. His body language usually gives it away what kind of mood that he's going to be in. Soup says, do you have a set of questions depending on his mood? No, I don't. I will ask what I'm going to ask no matter how he is. But obviously my answer might depend upon, or his answer might depend upon what mood he's kind of in. So, yeah, I don't change my question based upon how he answers questions. Maybe I should, but I don't feel like I've needed to so far. But maybe if there's kind of a moment to ask a really jokey question that leads into something more serious, and you can tell that he's just not in the mood, maybe I might, but I haven't so far. So I haven't needed to. Jay says, Tom, do you think Mikel is a moody guy? No, I don't think he's moody. I think, as I say, I think he can be cold, but I wouldn't describe him as a cold person. I think there are times where he can be cold, but I wouldn't say that he's moody. But I think you're right to say he is a perfectionist. And I think that's absolutely a fair analysis. I think he is a perfectionist. He wants to win every single game, every single duel, dominate every single part of the pitch, not give anything away, and try and even dominate press conferences in a way in which he can kind of control the narrative in some ways. It's difficult to do that when you don't know all the questions. You know, sometimes he might know what's going to get asked if someone's offered up the opportunity to say. So what you might do is that you might say, I'm thinking about asking this. If you want to kind of let him know, because he might give you a better answer if he's prepared for that certain question. Most of the time, I probably won't. Probably like 50-50. I might offer up what I'm going to ask if I think he might give me a better answer if he knows in kind of prep for what I'm going to ask. But if I'm asking something where I don't want him to know what I'm going to ask, then I won't let anyone know what I'm going to ask. I think that's important to point out. You don't have to ever tell anybody what you're going to ask. You know, you can volunteer to, but you don't have to. Richard says, when's the Sub Focus album coming? Friday, mate. It's out on Friday, and then I'll be at his gig on Saturday. I can't wait. It's amazing to me that his album is launching on the same day as my birthday. Like, my favorite artist of all time launches his brand new album on the same day as my birthday. It's probably the best birthday gift I could have asked for. So yeah, it comes out on Friday. Looking forward to it. Can't wait. Brilliant album. The singles that have been released so far have been spotless, have been so good. So good. D says, should we consider our squad as complete now, or do we genuinely need to buy in January? If so, what areas do you feel that we need to improve and why? Talk about Semenyo, but is that a need or a want? I think it's a need in many ways because one of Trossard and Martinelli could leave in the summer. I think we do need to keep it fresh. Where else could we add something? We don't need to. You're right. Like, we don't need to necessarily add a player, but if you can get Semenyo because of the situation of the release clause, and if maybe another club looks like they're going to buy him, you could potentially make that move and make that decision. So something to think about. We aren't at our 25 player cap at the moment. Daniel says, do you have to brief the press officer before you sit down? No, you don't. You don't have to do that. You can, as I said before, you can offer your question up beforehand so that Arteta might give you a better answer potentially, but you don't have to. It's just one of those things. If you don't have to reveal any questions at all. You don't have to have your questions vetted. You don't have to have your questions checked. You can offer your question, as I say, but no, you never have to brief anybody before the press conference of what you're going to ask. You can keep what you're going to ask very much to yourself if you want to. It's up to you. Sometimes I know that if I ask a certain question, it probably won't get a good answer unless I've said something beforehand, unless he's kind of ready for it. Because sometimes some questions need a longer period to think about than just that split second. Sometimes you want to get kind of an in-the-spot answer, and sometimes you might want to be more in a position to know that he probably knows something's going to come up. And Daniel says, so if something is asked that he doesn't like, what happens? I don't know. He can. Absolutely. Yeah, he can refuse to answer it, and he has done. If he get asked about transfers, he doesn't answer them. He said he's got his classic line. If you ask about a player that is being linked to Arsenal and they're not an Arsenal player, you know exactly what answer you're going to get. It's very rare that he ever gives an answer directly about a player. There's only a couple of occasions where I can remember it happening. I mean, one was when Curtis asked about Mbappe. Or was it when Curtis? There was another question that was asked about Mbappe. It might not have been Curtis. It might have been someone else asked about Mbappe. And actually he said, you have to be in the frame for those types of players. And that was the most I think he ever gave about kind of a player that hadn't played for Arsenal. So, yeah, I think that's definitely one of the situations where that can happen. Knowledge says, I kind of wish post-match media took inspiration from F1. In what way? Knowledge. I'd love to know what you mean. In what way inspiration from F1? Claire says, we're in a position now where we should be buying to replace first-team players. Exactly. Not actually to add. It's going to be, in the future, it's going to be about gradually evolving. We've added now. Now it's about evolving the team. Mike says, why does Sky get so many questions compared to others? Because they have the rights. So they have the rights. And so the rights holders have a certain number of questions at the beginning of press conferences, and they have more. So I usually get 2 because I'm not a rights holder. I don't work for a rights holder. I work for a company that has access to press conferences, but I'm not a rights holder. So the Premier League, TalkSport, Sky, sometimes TNT, sometimes the BBC, because they're rights holders, they will go first and they will get the opportunity to ask more questions. as a result. So that's why some people get more questions than others in a press conference. Kai says, Tom, would you rather have Semenyo or Rodrigo? Semenyo. I actually think I'd rather have Semenyo now. I think Rodrigo is a good player, very good player, but I have my concerns about Rodrigo. I have my criticisms of him, and I'm not necessarily sure he's the right player now for Arsenal. He's also more. I'm not sure whether he's the right choice. Rodrigo, I'm not sure now if he's the right choice. Semenyo has been excellent in the Premier League. It's that Premier League ability as well. And Daniel says, is there ever a situation where you don't get to ask something? Yes, that has happened. Because it's not like an order. You have to kind of put your hand up and ask for a question. If you don't get picked, you don't get picked. But I've been there enough now where they know who I am. So I will most of the time we'll get the opportunity to ask a question. But post-match, there's been situations where I haven't been able to ask. I mean, after the PSG second leg, I didn't get a question in like arguably the biggest game of the season, because a lot of people wanted to ask questions and we'd lost the game. So then the mood wasn't exactly the greatest. So I didn't get a question. It's not personal. It's just sometimes you don't get a question. Yeah, so it happens. Temi says, Tom, has Ez's performance at 10 further validated Odegaard's influence in the role? To a degree, yeah, I think that's probably fair. I have said before, I think Eze will be better on the left for us now, and I think that's the way. Arthur, have you dropped Barker? No, I haven't dropped him. I just don't think he's gettable for a reasonable price. That's why I love Barker. I think he'd be a great player, but I just don't think that he's worth the money that it would cost to get him, if that makes sense. Jack says, has anyone ever asked your question before you got the chance to ask it? Yeah, all the time. All the time, Jack. And that's why you got to be prepared with kind of backup questions, because it does happen. And it's not like something that I can be annoyed about. We don't go around the room saying, I'm going to ask about it. Well, sometimes I might say, I'm going to ask about this. If I'm really keen on asking a question, I might be like, I think I'm going to ask about this, just so others are aware. But if someone asked the question I've said I'm going to ask, it's not personal. They might have wanted to ask about that, and they've just asked it first. It's never personal. You can never be annoyed at somebody else asking a question before you. You might be like, oh, damn, but you're not going to be like, oh, that was personal. You're never going to think that. So, yeah, no, you have to be prepared for when that situation happens. And sometimes I'll go into a press conference and I haven't got a question. I haven't got a pre-prepared question. It might be a period where things are going in a certain direction and I haven't thought of anything to ask that week. And so what I'll do is I'll listen to some of the other questions that are asked. I'll listen to some of Arteta's answers and I might get inspiration from there. So, yeah, all manner of different situations can happen for a presser, for sure. If I think of something in the week, I'll usually write it down and think I might ask about that. And then I'll forget to check my notes and forget I was meant to ask that. But yeah, it's up and down. Depends on the situation. Depends on the context. Semenyo is a better fit for our style of play, says Jay. I think we absolutely agree, it seems, on that. Shanita says, all the people saying Eze is a 10, they have to shut their mouths. I don't think they do, Shanita. I think he can play as a 10 very successfully, but I think against low blocks he can struggle. But I still think he can play the 10 very well. But I think for me, he's more on the left. I'd rather see Eze playing on the left with Odegaard as our number 10. Right, I think we're going to wrap the show up there. I've got to get going with work this morning. But good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. Greatly appreciate you listening and for being here. If you haven't checked out the new podcast, please go back and give it a listen. Seeing Red, the unofficial Arsenal podcast. Go and check it out. Myself and John Cross discussed everything for an extra hour. So if you're not done and you want another hour of Arsenal chat, go over to that Seeing Red podcast. Go give it a listen. We look forward to welcoming you if you aren't already part of the team. But thank you for listening, as always, here. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful. And as always, up the Arsenal.